Remember last season when the Vikings went 11-0 in one-score games, an NFL record? Well, Minnesota's first 3 games have all been one score. They're 0-3. At some point, the luck was going to run out, and it's gone. They're stuck at the bottom of the NFC North with the Bears, while the Packers and Lions lead the way. This is full disaster for the Vikings. This may be Kirk Cousins' last season in Minnesota, and there's a very real chance that a rebuild is coming soon if they can't turn it around. The Vikings started the season at home against the Buccaneers. Now, Tampa wasn't expected to be very good. Tom Brady just retired. Now Baker Mayfield's the starter. There wasn't a lot of optimism. The Vikings actually led late in the second half, but then a Mike Evans touchdown tied it. It was a really close back and forth game, the type of game the Vikings won every time last year. The Bucs took the lead in the third quarter, then the Vikings tied it early in the fourth. Ultimately, the Buccaneers did win 20-17 after Chase McLaughlin hit a 57-yarder with about 5 minutes remaining. There wasn't much reason to actually worry. It was only one game, and there were some positives. Justin Jefferson did his thing, 150 yards. Rookie Jordan Addison looked really good, and he scored. The run game was non-existent, though. Alexander Mattison has been bad. Kirk Cousins also struggled. He did complete 3/4 of his throws for 344 yards and 2 touchdowns, but he turned the ball over 3 times. Now, on paper, the Bucs are definitely the worst team the Vikings have played this year. In week 2, they visited the defending NFC champion Eagles and put up a pretty okay fight. Philadelphia may not be quite as good as last season, but they're still a pretty good team. It looked like it was going to be an ugly loss there at one point. Philly was up 27-7 early in the third quarter, but 2 Vikings touchdowns made it a one-score game. Both teams found the end zone one more time, and that was it. 34-28. Now, it looked ugly, but I actually think it was a game the Vikings could have won. Justin Jefferson had that fumble into the end zone for a touchback right before the half, and honestly, I feel like that really swung the game. If Minnesota gets points there, it's big. Instead, the Eagles get a field goal, extend the lead, and I think that just ruined Minnesota. Jefferson again had 150 yards. Addison scored again. That's looking like a really good duo. Kirk played great, 364 yards, 4 touchdowns. Still, there was a problem, the run game. Madison had 28 yards. No one else had a single yard, and the Vikings only ran it 9 times. You never want to start 0-2, but you really don't want to start 0-3, and that's exactly what the Vikings and Chargers were thinking on Sunday. Both the Vikings and the Chargers were in the playoffs a year ago and weren't expected to win their division this season, but still had solid expectations. They both really needed the win, and it came down to the wire. It was a back and forth game, and then the Chargers went up 28-24 with 8 minutes remaining, and Minnesota just couldn't score. They had a drive that ended with a turnover on downs with goal to go. Then they got back to the red zone, and a Kirk Cousins pass was tipped and picked. I mean, it's a crushing loss. At least there was a positive. The Vikings finally figured out how to run the football. Madison had 93 yards, and next week they're going to have Cam Akers too after they just traded for him. That Alexander Madison, Cam Akers running back battle is going to be the craziest mid-off. I can't wait for the reports coming out of Vikings practices. It is a good sign they finally ran well. Jefferson, another 150-yard game, and Kirk Cousins threw for 360 yards and 3 touchdowns with an interception. Statistically, the Vikings have looked good on offense. Still, they're 0-3, and you're getting close to the point of hitting that panic button. I've rooted for the Vikings for the last few seasons, actually pretty hard, and a lot of that has to do with Kirk Cousins, and honestly, I do think this is his last year in Minnesota. Kirk Cousins is currently playing on a 1-year, $35 million deal. He's been in Minnesota since 2018. It's been a long time, and he has been really good, but there's been no postseason success. Still, the Vikings have won 10 games twice with him at quarterback, and they've had pretty good teams. Cousins may not be truly elite, but he has been consistently good. He's had at least 25 touchdowns in every season since 2014. I was in middle school the last time he didn't have a 25 touchdown season, and that's because he wasn't even the real starter. It was Robert Griffin III. Kirk Cousins is a good player. He isn't going to have a hard time finding a new home if the Vikings do want to go in a different direction. I know he's had his issues, but there's a reason why Minnesota still hasn't moved on. You can't just go find another quarterback better than him. I think he's a top 10 quarterback in football. Granted, he may be 10. Kevin O'Connell really cut him loose a little bit last season, and it paid off with how good Minnesota was. They were together briefly in Washington, so there was already kind of that relationship there. Unfortunately, I just think it's become really clear that Kirk Cousins needs everything around him to be somewhat perfect if he is going to win. And the Vikings tried. The Vikings offense has a lot of talent. The passing game is great, and Justin Jefferson is a big reason for that. He already has 458 yards this season. It's only been 3 weeks, dude. He's a beast. He may be the best wide receiver in football. He also might be the best player in football. He's that good, and he makes Kirk Cousins' life a lot easier. KJ Osborne is the 2, and then there's rookie Jordan Addison. Minnesota just used a first rounder on him. He's already looking really good at the next level. He dominated with Kenny Pickett and Caleb Williams. Now he's getting it done with Kirk Cousins. Really no surprise there. I really liked Addison coming out of college, and I think he's absolutely the real deal. The run game looks really different without Dalvin Cook, but we're going to have to wait and see what it actually looks like with Alexander Mattison and Cam Akers both active. Luckily, the Vikings have a pretty good offensive line, headlined by elite offensive tackle and former Hokie Christian Darrisaw. He's probably the best player that came through Virginia Tech when I was a student there, and he gives me another reason to root for the Vikings. Now, here is the big problem. The Vikings defense blows. They're horrible. They had one of the worst defenses in football last season and probably will again. They're already giving up 382 yards per game only 3 weeks in. There's some older names on that defense that are recognizable, like Danielle Hunter and Harrison Smith, but it's a terrible unit. The Vikings defense has just been horrendous again this season. But they are about to play a really bad team in week 4, so hopefully they can finally get some confidence going. If there is good news for the Vikings, it's that they get to play 2 of the worst teams in football over the next 3 weeks. The Panthers and the Bears. Carolina looks bad, and we're gonna have to see if Bryce Young even plays in that game or not, but Chicago looks like they're honestly just trying to lose every game. They're that bad. So Minnesota should beat them theoretically. The downside is that in between those games, the Vikings play the Chiefs and then the 49ers right after the stretch. Those could get really ugly. The Vikings simply don't have the roster to beat them. Patrick Mahomes should have a field day with the Vikings defense. Then in the following 5 weeks, at Green Bay, at Atlanta, New Orleans, at Denver, and the Bears again at home. That's a span where I do see a lot of potential wins. The Packers have looked pretty good early on. Those NFC South teams are kind of interesting. And then Denver and Chicago, well, they suck. That leaves us at the Vikings week 13 bye. I really don't think the Vikings make the playoffs this season, but it is going to come down to those final 5 weeks. They get the Raiders and Bengals on the road, the Lions and Packers at home, and then the Lions again on the road. Who really knows who's going to be hurt by that point and even who's going to be playing for anything, especially in those last 3 weeks. But I bet that in that last 3 week span, either the Packers or Lions are going to lock up the division, but maybe Minnesota can make some noise. It is really disappointing, but I don't think this Vikings team is a postseason team. They got extremely lucky last season in one-score games, and now everything is just evening out. I really just feel bad for Kirk Cousins and Justin Jefferson because they're so good, and this team is so talented, and that offense is so good, but it sucks because with that defense, they're not going to do anything. I guarantee it.